good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttin.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Let's begin with Datuk Sri Najib Razak's first day on the witness stand at the High Court today over alleged corruption and power abuse in the SRC International trial. Now, this marks the first time that a former premier has taken a stand in the court of law. Of course, this is the first time a former Malaysian Prime Minister has testified as a witness in a criminal trial involving himself. Because he's chosen to do this, Najib will now be subjected to a cross-examination from prosecutors and not to mention public scrutiny. What do you make of this?
Well, because, he did have the option to remain silent, but that would have perhaps counted against him. This is probably the best way for him to defend his position. But it does remind me, Melissa, of very important examples we see around the democratic world where former leaders are taken to task for their time in positions of power for abuse and so on. We have had examples from South Korea, Brazil, in fact, many democratic nations. And I think the important thing is to note that in some undemocratic nations, when people fall from power, it's often a power grab, and the question of them being put on trial might be more about politics than it is about justice.
Well, okay, but for cases like perhaps receiving illegal donations, South Korea, the first female prime minister comes to mind. She's also the first former prime minister of the Republic of Korea to serve prison time. In Brazil, President Lula, I think, was also sentenced 12 years in prison, jailed in April of last year for charges of money laundering and passive corruption. But I think coming back to the Najib trial, there will be no shortage of drama to keep trial watchers riveted. I think today on the stand, Najib forgot to bring his IC with him to the witness stand.
And Melissa, that's very interesting because it elicited a response from his lawyer who said that I'm sure we can all appreciate that people of this stature don't always have these things on their mind. And he then goes on to quote an instance where President Barack Obama of the United States forgot to bring his credit card to purchase flowers for his wife. Now, we know, of course, in the instance of Najib Razak, he might not be in the dock today if he forgot to bring those credit cards when his wife wanted to purchase, flowers and more.
Okay, so he clearly forgot to, he remembered the credit cards but forgot the IC. What do you think the lawyer meant by saying people of this stature and then comparing Najib Razak to Obama?
Well, and this comes back to the aura around the Razak family. I think now, firmly dispelled in the minds of some Malaysians, though there's a lot of hand-kissing, I think, when you watch the videos of his arrival at trial and so on and so forth. I mean, clearly loyalists will continue to be loyalists. The other thing, of course, is this idea that somehow people of stature don't play by the same rules that the rest of us have to play by. And this is probably the reason for the downfall of Najib Razak. This insulation from the normal conduct that is expected of human beings, or citizens, respecting the law and such, right? To think that you're somehow extraordinary, this is what that lawyer's comment really is about. He's trying to promote this idea that somehow Najib is special.
Yes.
And being in the dock proves that he isn't special.
And you might not have to bring your IC with you if you are of that stature. All right, Najib's defense trial will continue tomorrow and also for the next 2 weeks. So we're going to be keeping a very close eye on that. But let's now turn our attention to the Malaysia Tattoo Expo 2019 controversy. You have had to be living under a rock if you've missed this story. The latest turn of events. Blackout Trading, which is the organizer of the event, they have apologized over the semi-nude incident during a competition, which, of course, has gone viral on social media.
Yeah, but listen, one of the things, because, when you look at the apology, it seems like this is a typical case of a Malaysian resolution, right? So even if you are really not in the wrong, you apologize because the people who are in authority get to set the script. And this is the unfortunate thing. It's another instance where many of the elements, I think, in the controversy speak to the ways in which we've been doing things for many years, including the way in which government presumes to have the right right to define what is Malaysian culture.
Right.
The charge of obscenity is used against norms of other people. For instance, people for whom dressing much more modesty is, I think, not the issue. Really, it's about dressing in ways that other people might find immodest become problematic.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of want to talk about the conversations, Sharaad, surrounding this, because on what basis the event was attacked and on what basis the event was defended on particularly social media. The conversations have been fascinating, and I just want to know. I mean, do you think that the outrage really stemmed from the fact that it was a tattoo expo, or the fact that there was, a lot of skin on show?
Well, it's very hard to tell what the detractors, feel, and they could be motivated by all kinds of things, including trolls who perhaps want to distract us from the main event of Malaysia, which is the Najib trial, right? So there
also
can
the
always
Zaid Hamidi trial.
The Zaid Hamidi trial, or many of the trials of those former leaders are now kind of cast away from politics or power at the center. I think what's important to recognize is or to focus on is actually the response of the government in power today.
Yes.
Now, when you listen to the statements that they make, then I think you have real cause for concern. Because it seems to me that the current government does not know how to defend diversity.
Okay, if I may.
Many of its leaders are tone deaf.
If I may, Tourism Minister Muhammadin Ketapi, who is the MP for Silam in Sabah, has said, I understand it was done behind closed doors, but this contravenes etiquette. Hosting international events is good for the tourism industry, but not this way. It does not reflect the true image of Malaysia, which is mannerly and decent. Mannerly and decent. Is that the true image of Malaysia?
Well, I mean, it's a question of how you define these things. Again, it comes back to the idea that government somehow has the right to define this, and it has the right to impose its values or its thinking on the rest of society. I mean, I think there's a recalibration, or there's a promise of a recalibration between society and state in the new Malaysia. And that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping for a less government intervention, and actually the kind of arrogance behind some of the expressions used by government ministers in this case.
I have to say, Sharaad, I really wonder what we can learn from this controversy, and look at the fallout that what has happened from this. I mean, in the response of the government, I'm just wondering, imagine if you are East Malaysian, and this is, the government of the day, the federal government of the day, I guess just deepening that divide, deepening that resentment against West Malaysians.
Well, there's that. There's also the question of many West Malaysians who do, in fact, enjoy tattooing as a lifestyle choice, nothing to do with culture, really. But again, they will be alienated because this is a government that's not going to defend their right to their choices that have no impact on the lives of other people. So if you didn't like tattooing, if you don't want to, nobody's forcing you to go to a tattooing event. This was actually one of those ticketed events. So you couldn't have just strolled in. You would have had to pay the money to go in and then be outraged. The question is, why can't this government defend diversity and freedom of choice?
Fundamental liberties. All right, we'll come back and take a closer look at the postponed IPCMC bill. Stay tuned to consider this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Now, the government has decided to defer the second reading of the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission Bill, or better known as the IPCMC Bill. Now, it will only be tabled in the next Dewan Rakyat meeting. The IPCMC Bill would create an independent oversight body to investigate and handle disciplinary action on police misconduct. So, to discuss this further, we have joining us in the studio, talking about police reform, Melisa Sasidaran, Director of Lawyers for Liberty. Welcome, Melisa.
Thank you.
Help us understand what happened today, the deferment. Was this expected? Were you surprised when you heard?
Well, as we know, this bill has been pushed very strongly by the Law Minister, Dr. V.K. Liew, because he's been one of the few reformists in the current government. And there's a lot of work that has gone into pushing for the IPCMC bill. You know, lots of consultations have been done. You know, the PSC Select Committee has done public hearings on this, and civil society have put in various recommendations on how to fine-tune, you know, the bill. Because the question here is not whether it should be formed. The question is, how are we going to do this? You know, of course, there's various models that we can take from other countries, you know, so there was so much discussion, and finally it was due to be tabled today for the second and third reading. From our side, there was a 50-50 hope of it being passed, simply because of the amount of work that has gone into it. So, you know, it's quite clear, and as I understand it, the Cabinet has also approved the tabling of this bill, meaning it's a government bill that should be supported by all Pakatan members of Parliament at least. But unfortunately, as we can see in the recent weeks, you know, we can see from news reports that there has been an increase in the pushback from the police mostly. And of course, you know, nowhere in the world you will find a police force that will support this. No one wants more scrutiny.
Right.
Yes, but but you know, what has been astounding is that, you know, at every public hearings that has been done by the PSC, the police has mobilized themselves, and they have, you know, put forth, you know, a whole list of you know, their objections to the bill. And it's just shocking, you know, why would you not want, you know, better accountability, better transparency? If you're talking of a few bad apples, which, you know, there may be more than a few, but the whole point is we want to weed out these bad apples.
Okay, could I just interject at that point? I mean, at this point, because they, you know, the police have, over the years, have maintained that they can deal best with their own miscreants and those who are rogue, as they put it, right? They feel that they have sufficient mechanisms internally to deal with that. The critique, of course, on the other hand, is that unless these mechanisms are independent, then the public is not going to trust them. And we have many instances where the existing mechanisms have failed to deliver justice, to say, especially in cases of death in custody, of which perhaps there are too many. So, Melisa, we know that there's the two in push and pull. You say VK Liu is a reformist within the government. You say Cabinet has given, as you understand it, given its approval to it. What could have gone wrong?
Well, I think, you know, there are two parts to this. Firstly, the opposition. Of course, they have, you know, thrown their full support behind the police, and there's a reason for this. There's a very clear reason for this. It's simply because the opposition were playing politics. They're not serious in advancing this country to a better country, better democratic country. They are simply protecting the police force who have protected them in the previous administration. We are all well aware of the sedition dragnet, the peaceful assembly dragnet. You know, so many people were arrested. There was rampant abuse of power. You know, apart from death in custody, police shootings. So and you know, the police have always protected UMNO. So now they have thrown their support behind the police. Secondly, although the law minister has taken it upon himself to table the bill, but essentially this is a Home Ministry bill, because the police force is actually under the Home Ministry. So the only person who can withdraw the bill is actually the Home Minister. And I think there's so much spotlight on the law minister because he's the public face of this, but not enough is being shown on the Home Minister, Muhyiddin Yassin, who has to answer why did he, despite the cabinet green light to table this, why did he pull back this bill?
Okay, so does this bill require bipartisan support, as we had like with the Undi 18 situation?
It requires a simple majority. Okay. So it's just a matter of commitment from the Pakatan Harapan government, and they have the numbers. But unfortunately, as I said, you know, it's the Home Ministry, that is, the stumbling block to this. And I think they need to answer why did they pull the plug on this at the 11th hour.
Well, I'm also curious because you said that the police have been mobilized in the past few weeks, months even, to raise objections. But when the IGP first took office in May, he was very supportive. He gave police reform the green light. And I'm just wondering why there's still been numerous objections coming from the police if the man at the top, if the IGP has already given his support for this.
And the tabling of this IPCMC bill has taken us 14 years to reach this point, only because the IGP, when he took office, he was freshly minted, he gave the green light, and it paved the way for the government to finally table this in July. But of course, over the last few months, perhaps true colours have come out. And I can only say that the mobilization of the police and the strong objections from them, it clearly shows that there is no seriousness in supporting this bill. Because
sorry, can I just say again before we go to a break? Is it because we could have had an IPCMC bill that was quite toothless? But now it seems like the government was very serious about giving the IPCMC real muscle. Could the IGP have actually supported a toothless IPCMC rather than one that actually would be effective?
Actually, these are all just excuses. Because if you look at the IPCMC bill, it's not perfect in any way. And no country, when they start to form an independent police complaints commission, it starts off perfect because every country starts off against a backdrop of public distrust in the force. So there are provisions in the IPCMC which are lacking, but there are also good provisions, like for example the disciplinary sanctions, which is not in the EAIC bill. That's why you see recommendations being made, but at the end you can't do anything with it. There's no power to impose disciplinary sanctions, fines, and reprimand, and so on. And also with the IPCMC bill, there is a provision where for cases of grievous hurt and for death in custody, you have to automatically refer it to the commission. So these are all good improvements, which unfortunately the police is objecting to.
All right, we're going to come back and continue this conversation on the IPCMC bill right here on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Now, several civil society groups have questioned Putrajaya's decision to postpone the debate and voting on the Independent Police Complaints and Misconduct Commission Bill, or better known as IPCMC. The delay has raised questions as to whether there is genuine political will when it comes to police reform. So we have in the studio with us Melisa Sasidaran, Director of Lawyers for Liberty. And now joining us on the line, we have Ivy Josiah, who was a member of the Police Royal Commission of Inquiry in 2004. Ivy, thanks so much for joining us. Now, there was an attempt to reform the police back in 2004, to which there was much resistance. Now, does this feel like history repeating itself all over again? And can you tell us a little bit, Ivy, about that time when it came to police reform?
Yeah, of course, you have to remember in 2004, 2005, I think the police and everyone knew that it was only going to be for a year. This Royal Commission under the Commission of Inquiry Act was only going to last for a year, and we extended it to another 6 months. So perhaps the temporary nature did not require for people to be so resistant. Although when the police came to see us, because they submitted proposals on housing, salary schemes, even past youth came to submit their proposals. Everybody was supportive that we want to give you ideas to the Commission on how to improve the welfare and also to improve the human rights standards and the integrity of the police. So perhaps because it was only for 1 year, there was resistance, but definitely this time around, it's very, very organized and much louder and a lot more powerful, may I say. The resistance has been very well organized. I agree with Melisa that it has been a very organized resistance, and basically they have these. One of the good things about having these open sessions is that we want everybody's opinions. But I keep saying this. Even yesterday, I was at the Institutional Reform Caucus meeting. I kept saying, nowhere in the world did any police commission come about with the approval of the police. So yes, the police can say we are not agreeable to this. At the end of the day, the cabinet, in this case, I'm assuming it's Ministry of Home Affairs, but I will say cabinet, let's say the whole cabinet, has to take responsibility and have the political will to just institute it. And definitely they have the simple majority.
Right. So, Ivy, what do you think needs to happen now? I mean, we have a situation, as you put it, it's a kind of impasse. I mean, the old politicians of Malaysia, the politicians of the old Malaysia, as it were, relied heavily on the police to carry out their will, right? In many ways. It was an authoritarian state dependent on police powers. We're supposed to be moving into a democratic era. Now, what do you think will convince the cabinet led by Dr. Mahathir, it's a Dr. Mahathir administration, convince him that the public is there and wants this, and regardless of the needs or desires of the police hierarchy, this must go through?
Well, I guess you can make it into an elections issue, you can make it into a voting issue, because I think at the end of the day, the voters, the Malaysians want this IPCMC, because the deaths in custody, you know, the violations, the beatings, the torture, all of that should be enough, right? So perhaps we should make it into an elections commission. I was telling my colleagues in the CSO world that we have one day to be collectively depressed. Of course, we all are disheartened, and the work starts tomorrow after 24 hours. We have to start lobbying. We have to convince people, because even like yesterday, you know, members of parliament were telling me that this is unconstitutional, when over and over again we've had shown that it is not. It is constitutional. Shah Faruqi himself, as an expert, has explained that this is constitutional. So there are many myths around this too. But I think the resistance basically comes from the fact that the police do not want it. So yeah, Sharaad, I do not know how to move on, but I do know how to move on. The only way I know, to lobby, make it into an elections issue, make it into a voters issue, and make it into a public policy issue that the public wanted.
All right, Ivy, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing those insights with us. I'm going to come back to Melisa Sasidaran here in the studio with us from Lawyers for Liberty. Can you just comment a little bit on what Ivy said, Melisa, about the backlash saying that the IPCMC is unconstitutional?
As Ivy said, it has been repeatedly, rebutted, that there's no issue of constitutionality at all.
Why is there this? So why do they keep bringing it up? Is that a grey area?
It's the police bringing it up, and I think it's a case of if you repeat it often enough, perhaps you'll become the truth. So,
which is of course a kind of Nazi-era Goebbels-like approach to propaganda. I do want to ask you though this. I mean, let's not talk about the police. Let's talk about members of parliament and even those who are on the side of the government of the day. Is it that, again, in many ways, Malaysia, that we push too fast, too ahead of even the MPs who seem to be woefully ignorant of the bills that are put before them?
I don't agree at all that this bill has been rushed in any way. This has been in the making for 14, 15 years. This started during Barisan Nasional's time. And the way, we have seen how the consultations have been done, the tabling of the bill, the consultations, and all the efforts by CSOs to put in recommendations on how to improve it. There's plenty of time and I believe that the amendments that were supposed to be tabled today, there were supposed to be 37
amendments, right.
I think the current bill as it stands, as I said, it's not great, but it's something that we can work with and improve over time, just like what we have seen in the UK, for example. It has spanned over 30 odd years of evolving with time.
Right.
And actually the conversation on IPCMC in the UK started way earlier in the 1920s.
Very quickly, Melisa, do you think that it would help the conversation here in Malaysia with the IPCMC if that report by the Parliamentary Select Committee was made available so we understand what the 37 proposed amendments are?
Yes, I completely agree, and I have no idea why the Parliamentary Select Committee report was embargoed by Parliament. And because the report has been tabled in Parliament last week, it should have been made publicly
Public.
available on the website, together with the amendments, so that public can see what are the amendments and debate on it. And I think this was one of the reasons why many of our member of parliaments, put aside the large silence on this issue.
You're right.
But I think many of them were not aware of the changes that has been made to it, and they were unable to counter all these objections that has been brought by the police.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today and shedding light on this issue. That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me, Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for tonight. Thank you for watching and good night.